Welcome everybody in the next episode of Cross Border Talks. Today's topic is, I think, very actual and very interesting. We are going to speak about its situation in France, particularly the situation related to the proposed pension reform of Emmanuel Macron and his government, and about the social and labor reaction to this reform. First of all, I would like to welcome everybody on Cross Border Talks. Who doesn't know us, you will find more information on our page and on our social media. And I am glad that today's topic will be presented, or the questions we prepared will be answered by the French journalist working for the leftist newspaper Le Humanitaire, Gael de Santis. Welcome, Gael, in our talk.
Thank you very much.
And my name is Veronika Susheva-Salminen, and my co-host today is going to be my friend and colleague, Vladimir Mitev. So I would like to ask the first question. I like to ask general questions in the beginning always, and I would like to ask you, Gael, more precisely about the reform, about the pension reform. What is actually this reform about? What is the political and economical rationale behind the proposal of Emmanuel Macron and his government to do the pension reform? We pretty well know that this reform was already announced. If I remember, it was 1 year ago in February 2022. It was seen as one of the things which Macron was promising to do during his second and last presidency. So could you give us in a nutshell idea about what is this reform about? I suppose it's not just about the changing of the age of going to the pension, but about more other issues also. So please give us some kind of idea about what is this reform about, and what does it mean for the French society and for the French labor.
Well, maybe let's start to say what there is in this reform and then go to the rationale behind it. This new reform, today in France, we can go in pension when we fulfill two conditions: 62 years old, to be 62 years old, and to have worked 42 years. No, there is this reform presented, as you said, in February 2022 during the electoral campaign, so that Emmanuel Macron can say, you have voted for me and you have voted for this. There is this new reform, and the idea is to pass to gradually. You will go on pension when you are 64 years old, not before. And there is a second point, is the acceleration of reform that was put forward during the socialist government before 2012, so that you could go to 43 years of work before going in pension. So the two cumulates. This means he's 43 years old, that some people will go to work at 21, 22, 23 years old because they were studying. They will not be able to go in pension before 64, 65, 66. So this is the idea is this. The main rationale behind it is that they want to avoid a cost for the pension system which would be higher than it is today. Today, the pensioners, they perceive more or less 14.5% of GDP. The government, in these discussions with Brussels, with the European Commission, with their international partners, they don't want to go up this 14.5% of GDP, even though 19% of the population is already above 65 years old. So they don't want to increase social expenses for the state. This is the main stuff, because the main project of this government is to reform completely the French economy in a neoliberalist way. And France is somehow an anomaly in European Union, with 47, 48% of GDP, which is in taxes or cotization for the social security system. The medium in European Union is only 40%. So the idea of the government is to decrease this percentage to go on a European line so that the French companies can adapt and be competitive. The problem behind that is that if they want to lower from 48 to 40%, they will have to decrease the cost for healthcare, the cost for pensioners. So the rationale is behind this. So the main idea is to decrease the percentage of taxes in the French GDP. This helps the company, and this helps the stakeholders, and this helps the rich people. Mainly, this is what is at stake. And from a European Union point of view, France is not respecting the 3% threshold, which is for deficit, which is included in the three European Union treaties. So they have to give some proof for the Commission that they want to decrease this deficit. And the main problem for that is that one of the solutions they have found is to decrease the cost of the pension system. Then there is another rationale. This is that the French growth is not big enough because French people don't work enough. We go on pension by 62 years old. The week time of work is 35 hours a week. So this is interesting, is that at the beginning of the debate for pension, one of the parties, Modem, of the majority of Emmanuel Macron, proposed that we would work not 35 hours a week, but 35 hours and 30 minutes a week. So this is also a trend, that the idea is that people should work more, in a week, and should work more in a life to help functioning the big companies and so on.
Okay, who are the social groups or the political groups which promote this kind of reform? Who benefits from it? And not only in terms of parties, but also among the classes or groups of people, categories of economic categories, etc.
From a political point of view, this reform is put forward by the majority of Emmanuel Macron around Renew, which is Renaissance, which is the name of the party of Emmanuel Macron. The problem is they don't have the majority in parliament. That explains why we had a pension reform in 2019, and it was stopped by COVID. And it had difficulties going forward. It was a different kind of pension. It was not to rise the legal age would have remained at 62 years old, but there was a pivot age at 64. So you could go in pension at 63, but you would have had a lower pension, which was quite problematic. And this pension was abandoned because now Emmanuel Macron does not have any majority in parliament, so he has to discuss with the traditional right, which is namely Républicains, the party of Jacques Chirac, of Nicolas Sarkozy. And that's why he has this criterion of age of 64 years old before going in pension, because this is a demand of the traditional demand of the right wing in French parliament. So from a social point of view, it will benefit. The only way we have to get an equilibrium in a balance in the pension system is either you increase the time you are on work from 42, 43, 44 years old, but this is it will create a problem because people will be unemployed and you will have the same to pay for it, but it won't be the pension system, but the unemployment systems that will pay for it. So you can raise this. You can also lower the pensions. Second solution, but it's difficult because for the right-wing voter, the pensioners voters tend to vote for right-wing parties and neoliberal centrist Macron party, so they cannot do that. And third one is to increase the cotisation or the taxes. And the fact that this idea of increasing the taxes or asking the companies to pay more to make able for people to live in pension at 62, 63 years old, it is a problem for the rich. Is alternative. So the fact is that the fact that they refuse this alternative is in favor of the rich and of the so-called competitivity of the companies, because they don't want to increase the age. They don't want to increase the taxes on company and so on. Yeah, that's. It has to be said. I was mentioning the pivotage system, which was debated in 2019. This was a point system, so you would gather when you have more. When you are older, you get points. When you work, you get points, and at the end, each point has a value, and it gives you the amount of your pension. This was the idea of 2019 reform, and this reform was supported by one of the main trade union in France, which is a centrist trade union, which is la CFDT. The fact that this reform was abandoned because Macron did not have a majority in parliament, and he has to gather the votes of the right wing if he wants to have a majority, this previous reform was abandoned. And so now you have CFDT, this centrist union, which is against Macron's reform, and they are in the street today with CGT, Sud, and Force Ouvrière. This government reached to create really a block of union which has not been seen for 15 years. So you have a new trade union unity against this reform, and all the unions are asking this reform to be put out of the table. This is really, really interesting. This is really interesting. So mainly you have it's the center and the right which is standing for the reform, and for the classes which are standing for the reform, you have the richest people. No, the reform is the people don't like it really. In France, you have 2/3 of the people who are against this reform. A few weeks ago, the pensioners, the one who already had a pension, were in favor of this reform because they feared, well, they are voting right-wing and so on, but they also feared that if you don't increase the age, their pension would lower. No, there is a majority also among the pensioners against this reform, and this is quite a new thing, and it's interesting. So in opposition to the reform, you have all the unions, 80% of the workers, you have the left, you have also the extreme right, which is quite strong. We have seen it in last election. And on some aspects, you have also some fissures, some in the majority, some people don't really stand for the reform. So we'll see that the situation in next weeks can be interesting.
Okay, what should be said about this coalition that opposes the reform? It seems very huge, with millions of people going on the street. Who are the social classes or groups which enter in that coalition besides the labor unions, and maybe who are the political forces that support it?
And mainly the working, we don't call it working class movement in France, but the people working, they are against, we are against, they are against this reform. This is really important. And there are the riches and some intermediary classes and companies that are against, but no, it's a lot of people reject the reform. This it's really, really rare. You can see this kind of situation. Trade union unity, 70% of the people against the reform. That's really something which is completely new. And this is due to the fact that we have a government that was badly elected. I mean, Macron made 23 or 24% in presidential election, and he was elected with the vote of the left because we did not want the far right to be in government. And this is normal. We always vote against the far right because we know that the far right will be against the right of the migrants, against the right of the women, of the LGBT people, and against also the right of workers and unionists. So we always vote against extreme right. So he was able to get a majority in a presidential election, but this was not a majority in support of him. And that is why he knew that. And that is why in February 2022, he presented this reform and put it in the program. Normally, when you had pension reform in France, they were never put in electoral campaign debate. This was the first time one candidate did it before winning. And it was the idea that he can say, I have a mandate. But when you look at legislative election, he doesn't have a mandate because he doesn't have a majority in the French parliament. He has to find a majority each time for each text. So that's we are in a quite a good situation where 60-70% of the population against it, and a government which is not strong. Which is not strong, and also the society has changed. We had the Gilets jaunes 4 or 5 years ago, asking for public services in all around France and against the rise of cost of gas. We had the COVID, where we have seen that a lot of workers not earning a lot, where people that helped France to keep on feet during the pandemics, and you have a lot of money in France. And one of the reasons why this coalition is that strong against the movement is that first, people don't want it, but also it's because people know there is money to make another reform. With this reform, we speak of a reform to make economies of 10 or 20 billion per year in France, which is almost nothing. Last year, when you go in the stock market, we have the CAC 40, which is the index of the stock market of Paris. It represents the 40 main companies. 80 billions were given to stakeholders in 2021. We need only 10 or 20 billion per year to have a balanced pension system. So people, they know these kind of figures now, and they know that we could take money from that. 10 or 20 billion, it represents only 2% of the fortune of the billionaires in France. So Emmanuel Macron, before we had a tax on the riches, he has removed the tax on the patrimony of the riches. Only 2% per year, and they make some new money, so they don't need we can take it easily. If we took 2% of the fortune of the billionaires, we can pay for this pension reform. And also, when you look at the budget of the state, every year the state is giving 200 billions to the companies in France. Either it's a subsidy or it's you don't pay the social cotization for social security on lower wages. So the companies are assisted by 200 billions of euros per year by the French state. So there is money, there is money, there is money. People know it. And the government is saying, yeah, we have to find money. But the people know it is possible. It has been calculated that even though you don't take money from the capital, with 40, 50 euros per month that could the worker give, they could go in pension 2 years earlier. And a lot of people, they would also agree to pay more taxes themselves in order to go in pension by 62 years old. But also there are other arguments which are very sensitive in the society, because there have been an increasing sensation that inequality are a problem in our society. 1/4 of the poor is already dead when they arrive to the 62 years, when they are 62 years. So they would never get a pension. Also, we have in France a very big problem of unemployment of the people above 50 and 55 years old. When you look with the situation now, when you can go in pension by 62 years old with 42 years of work, we know that at 61 years old, 50% of the people only are working. 1/4 is not working because they have some kind of subsidies not to work, and 25% are unoccupied. So already today, half of the people are not working when it's 62 years old. If it's 64 years old, it will be even more. So that is a problem. And people know that also the companies, they tend to fire the people above 50 years old. This is a problem. We have a huge rate of unemployment among the seniors, and people know it, and this is a question we have to deal with. And fourth question, also with inequality, is that you had some measures in the French pension system. If you had some crafts which are difficult, if you would work, you would make some difficult jobs, you could go to pension 1, 2, 3 years before. And the problem is that during the socialist government, they made that more crafts were able to be in this situation. But with the Macron government, they reduced the number of kind of occupation where penability is recognized as a right to go in pension earlier. So you really have this problem with this pension. The broad coalition is mainly on 2 feet. 1 feet is we want to fight inequality. Second feet, there is money in this society to have another pension reform.
Okay, from what you say, it's clear that the Macron and his government are representing particular neoliberal type of interest, and this is ongoing redistribution from the bottom up again, as we know it from the neoliberal system. You said, and we know that there is a huge strikes in France. We know there is a united front of trade unions, which, as you said, didn't happen for a very long time. We know that Macron doesn't have a very strong position in the parliament, thanks to the legislative parliamentary election. So how is actually the government and Macron himself reacting to this relatively huge and quite articulated protests against the reform? Are they trying to, besides courting the right to have the support, are they trying to compromise? Or you feel that there will be rather some kind of repression against the strikes, against the trade unionists, against the labor? What is the reaction of the government to this wave of mobilization?
When we speak of France, we have to know that unfortunately the extreme right is very strong. So we are, when we are the left, we are always looking to make the difference between the extreme right and the right. This government is posing a problem on that way. Tomorrow, some high school students were removed of the front of their high school because they were occupying it. In the last years, the demonstrations went very bad. So you have a kind of authoritarian, more and more authoritarian gesture of the social crisis. They try to have the agreement of the right. This is really a problem, because the right also, they are in favor of diminishing the right to strike for instance, in public transports and so on. So this is not bad. But for the first time, the demonstrations are so massive that little groups of extreme left, the black blocs that were putting disorders in the demonstration, for the moment, they didn't really enter into actions, which is good because it allows a massification of the movement. You had more 3 million people in the streets. This is the biggest mobilization in France in the last 30 years. I've never seen that in my whole life, which is getting longer and longer after with the passing of the years, but I've never seen that. I'm quite impressed. So what kind of, you can see the authoritarian way of putting forward the debate in the way they have decided to conduct the debate in parliament. They have a minority government, but for these reforms, they know they have the right wing with them. So they could say the debate can last for 30, 40 days. The problem they have is that the consciousness in the country that another reform is possible is rising, and this is a problem for them. So what they have decided, normally in a pension reform, you pass it through some kind of a normal law. So it takes more 60, 70 days if there is obstruction from the left. They have decided to make a rectificative budget of the social security budget, which is completely strange way of passing this kind of a reform. Normally, for little stuff, you use this kind of legislative procedure. And it's based on the Article 47.1 of the Constitution, and it allows to pass the law in 20 days. So what's happening? You have thousands of amendments from the left or other parties in the parliament. And this is quite, you have les Insoumis that have made obstruction in parliament. They decided to put forward thousands of amendments. So it means that in 20 days, if all the amendments or all the articles of the law, because in France we vote amendment by amendment, article by article. So they will examine the amendment for the first article, the amendment for the second article, the amendment for the third article. And after 20 days, they say, okay, the parliament has not examined the whole text. it goes to the Senate and it returns to the chamber to be voted again. The problem is that very probably we'll have a situation where the text will leave the parliament without having been examined for the all articles, and the members of parliament will not have examined the Article 7, where you have the age for going in pension. So this is really a democratical problem, because they use, like from the beginning, they use the Article 49.3 of the Constitution, which allows to pass a law without bypassing the parliament. They use the Article 47.1 to bypass the parliament. And you have to know that this government, this is unique in Europe, is not elected by the parliament, because Emmanuel Macron nominated the prime minister, and normally within 1 week, 1 month, you go to the parliament and you get a confidence vote. This government never gave a confidence vote in parliament, so it's a minority government, and they use these 2 articles in order to push the law one after the other. So you have a government that doesn't care of the parliament, and which is really a problem. Second thing, in the last weeks, the French Communist Party leader Fabien Roussel put forward the idea of a referendum about this pension reform. The idea was that you could have debates all over the country, in the cities, in the companies, and somewhere else. The idea was welcomed by the left. At first with François Ruffin from La France Insoumise, and now, last week, the left has put forward in the parliament a referendum motion, which says, we ask this law to be put in front of the French people, and the French people will vote or not for it. We know it will not be voted because 70% of the people are against this reform. The problem is that the extreme right, and they are discussing the government and extreme right sometimes to pass some stuff in parliament. Some measures are passing with the abstention of the extreme right. The extreme right, which is against the reform, but against the demonstrations, they said, we will make ourselves also a referendum motion. So you have 2 referendum motions, which normally the presidency of the Assembly, which is in the hand of Macron, should not have accepted the one of the extreme right. They decided in the Conference of Presidents to make a tirage au sort. What would be tirage au sort? A draw. So they decided to make a draw, and it happens that the draw said that the referendum motion that will be examined in the parliament will be the one of the National Rassemblement of the extreme right, which creates a situation where the left wing cannot vote for a text proposed by extreme right. And this is really a problem, because it was made out of the book, out of the law. Normally, they should have accepted only the first one. So they have been, the left made some kind of maneuver in parliament to create a third resolution with some centrist people, third referendum motion. But the presidency of the Assembly does not want to examine it and to make a new draw to decide which referendum motion will be presented to the parliament. So they are making, they are reacting with not with anti-strike laws, but with a dialogue, with a compromise with the extreme right, in order to present the extreme right as the main opponent, against the reform, in order to, because extreme right, they just make 200 amendments and that's all. The left, they are, and the unions, they are blocking the country. You have demonstration which says that every day of strike you lose 1 or 2 billion of euros for French economy. This is the meaning of a strike. So they try to, for the capital, it's easy for them to have the opposition, the opposition as an extreme right, because the extreme right is an opposition that does not give a voice to the workers, to the social movements. So this is the way they are doing, and so we'll see how it works. But you see that liberal democracy is at stake because they don't respect the prerogatives of the parliament. First, second, they are destroying this barrier, this between the extreme right and the rest of the political spectrum, because they are discussing with them. We have seen in the past that, for instance, the extreme right decided to vote with the government against an increase of the minimum wage. We have seen some vice president of the assembly from the extreme right voted by Renew against the one of the left. So the problem is that the wall which was between the right wing and the extreme right is falling. So there is, to resume, there is some kind of an authoritarian way of dealing with the matter, because they make this wall disappearing between right and extreme right. And second, they don't respect the prerogative of the parliament. They are creating a strong executive.
So this looks like very typical, unfortunately, development under neoliberal hegemony, which, as we know, is undemocratical in principle, and it has more and more authoritarian features related to the fact that it is still trying to push its own agenda in the situation that people, not only in France but everywhere in Europe at least, are more and more realizing that this is the system which unfortunately is not having any future, and it's not able to solve the problem we are dealing with. Thank you, Gael, for your words and for your analysis. I think it was very informative and interesting, and we will definitely observe the situation in France more precisely, and we will hope that this mobilization against pension reform and all which comes together with it will be successful. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And I would like to, of course, say goodbye to everybody who was today with us. As you know, Cross Border Talks are on YouTube or on SoundCloud. You can listen to us, you can see us and listen to us. And you can, of course, follow us on several social networks like Telegram, like is Facebook, like is Twitter, and newly also LinkedIn. So thank you very much for your time with us. And I will be looking forward for our next episode about some interesting and important topic. Goodbye.